Prashant, welcome to the Build On podcast, where we talk about how the creator economy is getting built with Web3. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. So good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's an interesting day today, an interesting pod because we're gonna veer a little bit away from crypto and Web3 specifically, and talk more about just podcasting in general. And maybe we can weave in some Web3, and I'm curious about your thoughts on podcast NFTs, of course. But yeah, I will say that you were a big inspiration for why I started this podcast. I have seen your podcast many times and was inspired by it, and yeah, I'm so psyched that we're on a podcast together to talk about how you got into podcasting. I guess that's a good first question. How'd you get into podcasting, Prashant?
All right, let's do this.
Yeah.
So, I believe that a lot of my people around, like in school, in family, they said that, hey, you got a good voice. So that was always in the back of my mind that, okay, I got a good voice. How do I leverage that? So that's one. But other than that, I also was just into meeting people, into um, meeting new friends, making new friends, understanding people's stories, and trying to make sure that hey, I am getting as much street smart as possible, because the more you know people, the more good things happen to you. That's it. That was always in my mind. Now I got into Microsoft in as an internship. That's when I started writing on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn post blew up. I I got a bunch of followers, but then I also found that, wait, I don't want to do this one to many thing. I want to do one-on-one things. I want to make sure that I am actually building relationship, not just writing out and getting likes, because after some point, it just gets boring. That was again another, let's say, inflection point. And then after that, but the biggest inflection point was COVID. During COVID, again, I was starting to write a lot about just product strategies, business strategies. I really love that. But I also realized that, wait, I'm spending 3 to 4 hours per day writing about these highly intellectual things, but I am stuck in my room. I got nobody to talk to, and I'm really craving that social interaction. And this was also the time when I had finally made a little bit of money to afford a really good mic. For a podcast, what you need is a mic. And I also had a little bit of
Mhm.
money now. So that was again an inflection point. I went on Amazon, ordered the Blue Yeti. It came to my place, and this was a big motivation now. Now that I finally spent like $100 on a thing, I want to make sure that I make the most out of it. So, three inflection points. Number one, um, just having this good voice kind of thing that people said. Number two was realizing that I don't want to keep doing this one to many thing where I just get likes but not actually build relationships. And third
Mm.
was finally being able to afford a mic, a good mic. So, yeah, these were the three inflection points, and that got me to start my podcast. But now, the biggest thing, how do I convince someone to hop on my pod? Something that I also realized when I was living in New York was I got in touch with a product manager at Spotify. And I just DM'd her that, hey, do you want to hop on my pod? She was like, let's do it. Send me the previous episodes that you have recorded so that I
Mm.
just get an idea. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't have any previous episodes. This was the first one that I was going to do. And that's when I also realized that, hey, people trust when you already have put in the work, right? So I was like, okay, that podcast never happened with the product manager at Spotify. So
Mm.
I was like, okay, how do I build my library, my portfolio, which I can keep showing to bigger and bigger people, and getting start getting into conversations with really interesting people that I want to talk to. So the first one, I was like, okay, I'm sitting in my room. It's COVID. I cannot go and talk to someone, but I know someone in my house. There's this 11-year-old little kid that's going around, my little sister, and I know she loves to talk. So I was like, all right, you get on my pod. Let's talk about unicorns and your last trip to Dubai. And that's what we did. So that was my first episode. And after that, it just kept going.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, who better to have on your first episode than a sibling that you're clearly comfortable talking to and is certainly willing to hop on a podcast with you? Well, I hope so.
Exactly.
Uh, that's really great, and a lot of the same reasons are why I started a podcast, right? It's like the perfect excuse to be able to talk to really smart, interesting people and ask them a bunch of questions. Like how else, when else can you have somebody hop onto a video and just pepper them with questions for 30 minutes to an hour? It's like, it's almost like a cheat code, right? And I think that's partially how you posed it to me when I saw that, your pod was creeping up to almost 100 episodes. And, clearly you have gone past that point of what that original product manager asked you is, hey, like, what, let me see your history of podcast. May not have had it then, but you certainly have it now. With, what is it? Are you up to episode 100 yet? I think you're creeping close to it, right?
Something really weird happened in the past 1 week, which again makes me realize the value of Web3. We won't get into that, but
Mm,
basically, I'm just checking my phone right now. I have 94 episodes.
yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. So hopefully this goes well and you can invite me on for episode 100.
Let's
Well,
go. Let's go.
it feels like a good time to learn about, what is your podcast? What's it called? What's the topic? And how'd you land on that?
Definitely. My podcast is called Billion Moonshots, and my goal with the podcast name was two things. Number one, it has to be cool. That's it. Number two, it shouldn't be boxing me into a particular vertical. It should have a really vague meaning that I can keep defining, keep redefining, and it just sticks and it just makes sense. So I think Billion Moonshots is a name that fits a category where it's cool and I can keep redefining it in whatever sense whatever makes sense to me, such that it doesn't pigeonhole me into a particular vertical or particular idea or yeah, but in a particular way. So when it first started, my idea was simple that hey, COVID. I have so much time right now. I need to test my ideas. I was a product manager. So, as a product manager, your goal is, even when interviewing, even just to refine your skills, your goal is to keep looking at products around you, keep thinking about how can you make them different, more valuable to the users, keep solving problems in a unique ways. And Billion Moonshots basically represented that. How can I keep just solving problems in different ways, and how can I keep coming up with different ideas to solve problems in different way, uh, and put it out there. That's it. So what I did was, as I started by writing about product strategy and stuff, now I brought my friends who were in big tech and started discussing with them that, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the way Uber did this new thing, the way Amazon did this new thing? What do you think the strategy is behind it? What are the pros and cons? Stuff like that. So that was really interesting, and that's where it really helped me come up with new ideas because I'm getting new perspectives. That's how it started. Then one day, what happened was I was thinking that, hey, I don't know much about e-commerce. I really want to know more about how founders in e-commerce think. So I just tweeted that, hey, who should I talk to in e-commerce space? And that's when one of the guests who came on my previous pod, he just commented that, hey, you should talk to Sumit Shah, who's the founder of Dukan. And now that's again a different story why Sumit Shah was down to come on my podcast, because Dukan is $100 billion startup in India, but
Hmm.
he was down and he basically DM'd me. He DM'd me that, Prashant, let's do it. And I'm like, this is really cool. And I was like, okay, now we are breaking from just siblings to just friends to finally founders on the pod. And that was the inflection point that took Billion Moonshots to a more credible level. And then I had Sumit Shah on the pod. We talked about e-commerce, stuff like that. I was like, okay, I believe now I should redefine Billion Moonshots into startups, actual startups, not just startup ideas, but to startups. And that's when I went into the startup route. And then slowly, again, through just events, through just a bunch of interesting emails that were shared, I got founder of a $7.5 billion startup on my podcast. And that broke Billion Moonshots into the new level that, okay, now we are having like really, really legit people. Um, and after that, I believe Billion Moonshot just became again sort of that. Okay, it's a mix of really interesting startups out there and really interesting ideas that founders of these startups have. Um, and yeah, that is what has been going on. And slowly, as I joined the Web3 world or the Web3 space, I'm now really focused on just Web3 founders because I want to make sure that yes, I'm open to as many perspectives as possible, and I am open to these different ideas that can spark in my mind and help me in my role. So yeah, this is basically went from siblings to friends to startup founders to uh, bigger founders to now very focused on the Web3 founders.
Hmm. That's amazing. I love the story behind what's in a name, and it sounds like what's baked into that even further is that you took a lot of these shots, moonshots, if you will, by like doing different podcasts and talking to different folks and reaching out and just like requesting to see if anybody would come on. And through one of those moonshots, you got a billionaire founder, and that's incredible,
Exactly.
right? Like it's like yeah, you kind of put it out to the world. Hey, Billion Moonshots, and then a couple months, weeks later, a couple pods later, and you've got a $1 billion startup already on your pod. That's incredible. I do want to, well, because this is about the creator economy and using Web3, I do want to double click on what you said right before that answer. I know you said you don't want to go down that path, but I'm really curious. You mentioned that something happened and it showed you the power of, or like the reasoning behind Web3. And yeah, can you speak more to what you meant by that?
So this is very interesting. I believe when we met in Denver, I think I showed you this when I was just showing you my podcast, and I just opened Spotify, I went to Billion Moonshots. I'm like, wait, 60 episodes? What just happened over here? So basically, what had happened was my 34 of my past episodes were just deleted. I go on Spotify to check, I go on Anchor to check, and they are deleted. And I have no idea why, or how this happened. I look into my emails for email from Anchor, which is basically the distribution platform, to see that if they actually notified me about this. I went on Anchor customer support, messaged them that, hey guys, what's up? What's happening over here? I asked my producer that, hey, do you know if this happened? My producer's like, I have no idea. And yeah, so that's when I was like, what is happening? And it's like really good that my producer actually took this on, and he was like, okay, we still have our episodes on YouTube, and we don't have to do much work. I can just take that and re-upload. But
Mm,
that really made me realize that, hey, I didn't own my episodes. Anchor owned my episodes, and if they just go and hit delete over there or whatever by any mistake, it's gone. And it's good that I had a backup. It's good that I have a producer who was down to take responsibility. But yeah, like it really made me realize, like, this is what we were talking about, right? Like at XMTP, we'll be talking about owning your conversations. There are social protocols that talk about owning your content, owning your social graph. And similarly, now we need to own our episodes or own our content in this podcast space.
hmm. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I've started looking into other solutions, other servers, other management or data management solutions, and things like Arweave and IPFS are super interesting. And you know, storing on something like LensTube, or I'm still excited about the Farcaster version of LensTube that I'm sure will come out soon as well, where it's these decentralized social platforms and protocols that allow you to, own your media, own your profile, own your social graph, and won't allow that to happen where it's just like, oh, this mysteriously disappeared. I wonder why. Did I even get an email? I was just listening to a Bankless podcast where they're saying that on Mother's Day, YouTube just fully removed their content, shut them down, everything without even like an email saying why. And it was like, okay, luckily they had a lot of Twitter following and other places that they could rabble rouse and get everybody excited and say like, what the hell's going on here? But when you don't have that, it's like um, you're at the will of the centralized servers and the centralized companies that can, do whatever they want and make a decision on your behalf without even really telling you they're going to do it. And it sounds like that's what happened to you. I'm glad you had some backups and you could port things over from YouTube, but man, that must have been scary. Did you ever get a reason why they did that?
I have no idea. I still have no idea.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's scary. Uh, but an important lesson for all the folks listening to have backups and maybe consider a Web3 alternative. I'm certainly thinking about that. But okay, so back to podcasting. Glad you've still got your episodes, but yeah, can we speak more about some of the other challenges you've faced in podcasting, and how have you overcome them?
Some of the other challenges. Uh, Let me think about, or let me share one challenge that I've been just having a lot right now, just because I am traveling a lot for work,
Mm,
which is how do I host a really good remote podcast? And the challenge is basically all about the equipments. That what's the right equipment that makes sure that you can record a podcast from wherever you travel, and it doesn't make you uh, it doesn't make you stick to a place. It doesn't put a boundary on you. And for me, that was having AirPods and having my very basic Shure mic, uh, and which is, I believe it's called SM7B. Hmm. I need to double check on that, but I don't remember my mic name. But I believe it's
mhm,
called SM7B. So I think that was the biggest challenge, that what is the mic that I need to get which has the most, which is the highest audio quality, but also works remotely, but is also very easy for me to carry everywhere. And there are never any issues and never any technical issues when I'm recording, because I don't want like suddenly to stop working. Also, all these mics come with USB, and but our MacBooks are only have USB-C. So how do I make sure that I'm using the right adapter? How do I make sure the adapter doesn't move and mess up my audio? So things like that. I think that was the biggest challenge for me, because it sort of made me overthink a lot of things and sort of restricted me to travel, and also just an added burden on top of me. So yeah, I believe finally I figured out that this mic works for me. These AirPods are good. This MacBook, it's good. And I know the configurations. Now I have a lot of confidence on my setup for
mm,
remote podcasting.
yeah. Yeah, that's so important, and is a really good lesson for all the other folks out there that are, living the remote life, the nomad life, or are traveling for work. Like that's gonna happen, and you got to have a nice setup. And I'm sure it doesn't hurt for work meetings either, right? To have a little bit better audio and good camera. It's like, you know, we do these podcasts, but it seems like a lot of our entire digital existence is going to be with these same pieces of technology. And yeah, I'm so glad you have the right setup. I'm gonna have to hit you up because I've been doing all these at home, but once I'm on the road, I'm gonna need the right microphone. I've got the AirPod piece, but yeah, can you say more about the like the research that goes into it? How you prepare for each episode, how you figure out the right questions for the episode, and learn about who you're gonna have on.
Right. I think the best podcast that actually helped me really put this into perspective was the one with Shane. And what Shane mentioned was that you should never be asking the second question. I'm paraphrasing this, but basically he said that you should never be asking the second question. The first question should help you lead into the conversation. And I really believe in that now. So, what I need to do with my research is understand as much as possible about everything from about that person, but then do not prepare any questions. Only prepare the first question that will help me lead into the second one. Uh, so that has been a guiding principle for me now.
Who's
What
Shane,
I
by the way?
do, Shane Mack is the co-founder of XMTP Labs, which is a messaging protocol. So thank you for asking the question.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, in terms of research, what I try to do is that, okay, I want to know everything about you as a person from all the platforms. I want to know everything about where you work at from all the platforms, as well as I want to know everything about what people say about you and your company or whatever you do from all the platforms. So I think this is a very general, high level research that I do. And then I definitely do very specific things whenever I'm talking to someone who is very specialized in a particular field. So I was talking to, let's say, Kyla. Kyla Scanlon is basically a fintech creator. And when I had to research her, that was the first time I went on TikTok to research. And I was basically looking at all her past TikToks because that's where she is producing a content. And I went to TikTok, consumed all her content, understood what is she really passionate about, went on Substack, read all her blogs to really understand that, okay, what are there's definitely a lot of things happening in the finance world, but what are the things that are of interest to her and how she deeply thinks about it? What does she think makes good finance decisions? What does she think the people care about from all these fintech finance interest rates and stuff like that? So yeah, a very specific research for very specific people then.
Yeah, that's one of the podcasts I've seen, and you did a fantastic job of asking interesting questions that like certainly related to her experience and her work. And yeah, that's actually one of my favorite pods. I'm glad you brought that one up. If anyone else is thinking about checking out Billion Moonshots, I'd recommend the Kyla Scanlon episode. That one's great. And yeah, you mentioned how listening to Shane speak to like how you asked that first question and letting the conversation go from there. When did that happen? And like, how has your like almost 100 episodes changed like throughout? Like from where you started with talking to your little sister to where you are now. It sounds like you try to ask one question and let that lead the conversation. But like, what else has developed over the time of running this podcast?
I think the biggest thing that has developed is just how I think about podcasts now. Like,
Mm,
where does the podcast fit into my goal? I don't think about podcast as that, okay, I need to get 1 million followers. Because if I'm playing the follower game, then I'm playing against Joe Rogan, which means I need to be way better than Joe Rogan in
yeah.
terms of getting that follower base, stuff like that. So I try to make sure that in my mind, I define that why I'm doing my podcast. And I believe now I've defined. And for me, it's all about the person who is on my pod. It's all about building that relationship. So, podcast is the best excuse to talk to a person for 1 hour without any business goal in mind. That's it. There's no business incentive over here that, oh, I'm talking to you because I want to close a sale with you, or because I need some money from you, or I need a job from you. This is just going to be a conversation. That's it. And how I'm helping you is reach the audience. And by asking really good questions, by making you comfortable, it leads to very engaging conversations that people who want to learn about you, it really helps them really understand you and really understand where you're coming from, your perspective, and you can do that soft, organic marketing about what you do or your company. So this is how I think about it now, and also building friendships. That now that I am just traveling around the world and meeting new people, I want to make sure that I'm spending my time around high quality people, people who make me feel that, hey, I need to have more ambition, I need to do these things better, just open my perspective into into some specific areas. So yeah, I think about more that I want to build a friendship with the person that I'm getting on the pod, and that has been
Mhm.
working so far.
Yeah, it sure has. One of my questions was going to be advice you would give to other folks that are trying to get into podcasting, but you just answered it. The those are like those are great little nuggets of wisdom for folks that are going to you know start this journey. Like myself. This is episode 6. Who knows when I'll get to 96 like yourself, but uh, that piece of wisdom will definitely resonate with me and already has. And it makes me want to have more conversations with interesting people and to not. And I keep reminding myself, that's more important than any of the follower metrics or you know monetization. It's like, all right, if you're in this for the right reasons, which is good conversations, meeting good people, and helping your followers to learn more about what other people are up to and the interesting things that they do, and how they can become a creator in this new world, in this new economy. It's that's going to keep you going, and that's going to grow your audience. And that leads me to the next question, which is, what platforms are you using to reach your audience? Where are you posting, and how has that also changed over time?
Right. Before that, I'll mention one thing, that one key thing that allows me to think with that perspective is one-on-one relationships, making friendships, is the fact that podcast is not my main source of income. And I think that really helps you, because if you only think that I want to become the best podcaster and podcast is the only thing I'm doing right now, and that's the only, and I don't have any other sources of income, then it makes it hard for you to not think about followers, to not think about monetization and stuff like that. But because I have a source of income from my job, it really helps me it really helps me not put myself into a pressure cooker situation where I'm like, oh, if this podcast doesn't blow up, if I don't impress this number of people, then it's a waste of time. So that really helps. So I think that just puts into perspective for at least new creators that yeah, content is great, but when content is your main source of income, it puts a lot of pressure, which might not lead to good content. Just wanted to add that. But yeah, coming back to your question with distribution, definitely first I started with Anchor because Anchor is just the best one out there. Anchor was acquired by Spotify, and now there's a proper distribution integration where once you post on Anchor, it goes to Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. With Apple Podcasts, there is some weird thing going on over there, which I don't know, and as of now, I don't care. But if you're interested, definitely, if you're interested in more about ownership and stuff, definitely check out the specification of Apple Podcasts and Anchor, how it basically distributes on Apple Podcasts.
Hmm.
And yeah, with the podcast of Sumit Shah, founder of the Khan, that's when we entered the YouTube game because now it's like, wait, we are getting legit now. It's not just my sisters and my friends. Um, so, and this is also a really big podcast. They have a really good momentum going on in India. Let's capitalize on that and let's make the Dukan or Sumit Shah podcast the first one how we launch on YouTube. And so far, it's the most viewed podcast. So it was right timing, right conviction, and it just happened.
Mm. Yeah, that's really smart of you. It's like, okay, I know that something big is coming up. Let me launch onto a new platform with that piece of content. And yeah, it is by far the most watched. And again, if I'm going to recommend another podcast to go and watch, that one's really great as well. And they are also your sponsor on the podcast too, right? So
They were
clearly,
my
yeah, it went well.
they were my sponsor, and exactly, I believe that my goal was how do I make friendships and not just go to brands and be like, hey, I have 10K subscribers and uh, what's the right word? Sponsor me. So when I say I have 10K subscribers and you sponsor me, then the brand is thinking just from a numbers perspective that, hey, if you have 10K and if you're charging me 1K, let me figure out if there's a channel that has 15K subscribers and they can still sponsor for 1K, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in their mind, then they are just evaluating numbers that, okay, who can give me more reach for the same amount? But when you go with friendships and one-on-one relationship and trust, that that helps you make deals that are not just metric based.
Mm-hmm. Right. And have you spoken with Tokan about these new Web3 platforms and how you can potentially take the podcast there and what the sponsorship would look like, or have you thought about that yet?
So right now I'm going with the new rule. I just messaged my producer, I believe, 10 days ago or last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago that hey, now we will not do ads at all. And I believe the biggest reason is there are a couple of things. One thing is simply that I'm just so frustrated by the fact that Jason Calacanis, who is like worth hundred millions of dollars, if you look at his Twist podcast, This Week in Startups, he's talking about great things. I love his podcast. He has great perspectives, but then after every 5 minutes, he has ads. I'm like, why would you be so rich and then going for these 5K, 10K sponsorships just to mess up your user experience? If I'm listening to someone who's super smart, like think about Naval Ravikant, like he writes really good threads. He's super rich, he's super wealthy, and now he's dropping between that. Hey, by the way, use my 5% code for Uber Eats. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? That just messes up my entire flow. So I think that was one thing. I'm not super rich, I'm not super wealthy, but I really think about my user experience. I bought YouTube Premium, and I don't really like when podcasts have ads, and it's just me. So this is the reason why I am always thinking about that. Okay, what are other ways outside podcasts where we can partner so that I can give people a really good content user experience, but then how do I create value is from outside things.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that yet. And I'm the same way where, especially with YouTube versions of podcasts, it's really hard to skip the advertisements. With Spotify, you can just go and press plus 15 seconds really quickly and voila. Uh, Hopefully Spotify's not listening to me say that. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Where there are these like really these folks that don't need the money and they're downgrading the user experience, and it doesn't fully make sense to me either. But that's really a good note that you're avoiding that. You're changing up your tactic, and yeah, it sounds like it's a learning that came to you recently, and that an adjustment that you're making. And yeah, I really like that you brought up Naval, and I'm not as big of a fan as Jason Kalizakis, but I know that he's had a pretty meteoric rise in the podcasting world. To wrap, are there any other podcasts you'd recommend that you really enjoy, or that you think are great for folks that are looking to get into podcasting as a good role model?
Definitely. I think some of the podcasts that I'm listening to are in the space of business, ideas, and history. So, My First Million definitely is a favorite right now of everybody. So, My First Million is good. The other one that I really like is Founders. Founders, where he basically, the podcaster or the host, he basically reads a couple of books about the founders, the entire story, and then summarizes it with the key things that he took away. Right now, I am also getting into simply audiobooks because I also believe that books were created with a lot of intention and a lot of density of knowledge than a podcast. So for that reason, I definitely want to go towards books. I'm still debating that should I read the entire book or should I just go and look at the summary of these books on YouTube? Because some people have just like 10-minute summary of the entire books. But then I'm also feeling like the book comes up with stories that actually sets a really good foundation in your mind and you really understand the context of how that particular takeaway was delivered rather than just taking the takeaway and being like, okay, yeah, there are five takeaways from the book. So these are some interesting things that I'm thinking about. But yeah, definitely the founders, My First Million, and then How to Take Over the World. These are the top three that I'm listening to right now.
Yeah, those are great. I'll have to check out Founders. I'm not aware of that one, but I'm also a big fan of My First Million, and know that they've had plenty of success. And yeah, I would recommend everyone going to check that out. I would also recommend everyone going checking out your Twitter, your podcast. Where can folks find all of that information and start listening to Billion Moonshots?
Billion Moonshots is basically at Billion Moonshots. The only difference is that in Moonshots, instead of two O's, there's just one O. And the reason is because Twitter has a handle character limit. So that's the reason it's Billion Moonshots, but in the moon, there is one O, not two O's. So that's Billion Moonshots. And I'm on Twitter at Prashant P. Bagga, Bagga. That's me on Twitter.
Amazing. I'll This has been wonderful, Prashant. I really appreciate you coming on. I can't wait to hear the next 4, 5, 6, 100,000 podcasts from Billion Moonshots. And thank you again for all the inspiration for me starting my own. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Let's keep going. Thank you, Nick.